Welcome to the Driveline Baseball Podcast. We're talking mechanics breakdowns. We're doing some Q&A, and we're talking about a call out that we got from Joe Maddon.
All right. I tweeted out for asking for topics on the podcast, and there was a huge amount of responses. I was very surprised, but pleasantly. Will Carroll, legends on the internet and elsewhere, had a really great question of a topic that I love, which is like, with the success of reliever conversions this year, how would you identify the next Garrett Crochet or Seth Lugo? So I actually really like this topic a lot. Because I've been talking about it for a long time. I think people get unfairly pigeoned as relievers, whether they're a low draft stock, or they get injured and then they come back and they're trying to manipulate their innings or trying to get value out of them, and they just don't press them, and so they just stick them in the bullpen. And many great pitchers have been developed this way, so that's good. But starting pitching is extremely expensive. It's the currency of baseball. And being able to develop it. So I'm very happy to see Garrett Crochet, obviously one of the first people I can remember being converted. Well, Smoltz, of course, going from starter to reliever, back is that. But then C.J. Wilson would be the first one that I think of who demanded to be turned into a starter and then was very good at both roles. Mm-hmm. So with Cincinnati, we did that with Carson Spires, who's the closer at Clemson. And then we brought him in as an undrafted free agent and then converted him to starting pitcher due to our pro scouting department actually suggesting it, which I agreed with, which made it easy to kind of pitch that to the front office. Cam Bonifay, legendary ex-general manager and now I think still special assistant with the Reds, talked to me about Carson's athletic bloodline. His uncle played forever for the Astros, Billy Spires. Father was a legend at Clemson, and just grandfather was a legend at Clemson. It's a really athletic family. And additionally, Carson threw a ton of strikes. And so I couldn't agree more. And we converted him to starter in the next year. And then he mostly stayed a starter, was a reliever a little bit in 2022, I believe, 23 maybe a little bit, and then is back to being a starting pitcher. He was even a reliever this year a little bit in the big leagues, but he's been a starter / long reliever in the big leagues. And that's I think a really awesome story. The guy that you signed for $20K, getting to the big leagues is awesome. But then being able to be an effective starter, I think, is awesome. So I don't know if you had some thoughts on.
Well, I mean,
I'm all for it.
I mean, Crochet and Lugo, the two, success stories this year, are two completely different pitchers as well. And they speak to, probably separate developmental processes. Like Lugo is succeeding because of like arsenal diversity, essentially, and his ability to pitch competitively, which is also the Carson Spires story, since doesn't he have like 5 pitches or 4?
Yes. Yeah, 5, yeah.
So there's that, and then there's just like, Crochet just brings it.
Yeah. And was a starter, successful, right? In college.
Sure. Yeah. But it's just like, there's plenty of ways to get outs. The question is like, the challenge for starters is how do you sustain dominance over, the second, third, potentially fourth time through the order.
Yep. It was always a big topic with the Astros when I was working there too. That's why they did the piggyback system, the tandem starting, because just right-handed relievers that don't have 2+ to ++ pitches inherently have pretty limited value for your system and for the player themselves. So that's something Jeff Lunau always told me is like, you want to try to keep specifically right-handed pitchers starters as long as possible, and the tandem system was intended to do that. I know it's annoying for the players sometimes. It could be frustrating, but the reality is that they're just trying to get the most innings possible out of these guys, because you could be one of the worst pitchers in the big leagues, and we can name them, but there's no point in dragging anyone. But if you throw 180 innings and you're one of the worst pitchers by ERA, you're still going to have a positive wins above replacement, because innings is extremely valuable. So I think that's probably the easiest way to illustrate. If you're the worst qualified starter in baseball, but you log a lot of innings, you're still going to have positive value. So that just speaks to why I think it's a topic that I really like, and I hope more players get a chance to do it.
Yeah, but what would you, if you were evaluating a group of relievers, like what are you looking for?
Yeah, in Carson's case, I think both Cam and I saw similar stuff. It's a pretty low effort delivery, throws a lot of strikes, is really athletic. Really a similar case in Clemson. He was a walk-on two-way player Was immediately, didn't play much his freshman year, got some chances, but he was okay. Then came back his sophomore year, and as a non-scholarship player, when you're good, you're going to get your chance in the bullpen mostly. And he did, and then he quickly took over the closer role. And it's hard if you're a college manager to college coach to take a well-performing, high-leverage reliever out of the role.
Sure.
You know, and I mean, he had a 0 ERA the year we took him in the non-drafted free agency period. So I understand, you know, why they did it. But we just felt that he threw so many strikes. He was competitive, and the way that he paid attention in our classes and analytics and the questions he had. All of his pitches were minus to minus minus. But his attitude with Eric Jagers and I, then the coordinators, asking a ton of questions, being very studious, really wanting to get better, was like, oh, okay, this guy, it's going to be a long road to be even a decent minor league starter from where he was, much less a big league starter. But it's like, you know, this guy's aptitude and desire was so high that we felt if we're going to take a chance, this is probably one of the better guys to take a chance on.
Oh, so that also maps to, you know, what is known about, you know, Lugo, which is like he's incredibly studious, very observant, like enjoys the chess match of like setting hitters up and whatnot.
Yeah. So it's good to see. And I think it's good for the player, obviously, great for the club. The player can make more money, and the club's happy to have a starter. So I think it's a great thing, and I hope we see it more with the players.
But like you're saying specifically, like
starting pitching is good.
For sure. But like what you're saying specifically is like if you're trying to target, you know, making one of these reliever conversions, there's an archetype of a player who is like decently athletic, because Lugo's athletic too, but it's like athletic, diverse arsenal, studious, able to kill the 2-3 times through the order penalty through like successfully strategizing through the lineup, as opposed to like just letting it eat with 98 through the hula hoop.
Yeah, I think the crochet, yeah, that's fine. I would definitely try it with him.
Try what?
To start, you know, because that's what he does basically.
Yeah.
You know, not to minimize his studiousness, but yeah, I mean the command has to be at least average. I think otherwise it's not going to work. I think you have to have at least average, project to have at least average big league command. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I don't see that reliever to starter conversion working out too good for them. First of all, you're going to get fewer innings because you walk too many players. Pitch counts are up. You're not going to get as many innings as you probably would like. This means your development time is tougher, and that means it's one more thing you got to work on. You know, which in reality, like for Carson's case, he had to change his fastball, throw his breaking ball much harder, and change his changeup, and add 2 pitches. Like, that's already a lot to do in 3 years, much less fix your commands, get stronger. He had to throw harder. He was throwing 89 in college. You know, he throws up to 96 now. You know, so it's like there's already a litany of things you got to get better at, especially if you're an undrafted free agent. So it's like you got to kind of cut it down. And command is one of the things that's the hardest to fix and get better at, especially when you're trying to do other stuff. So to me, the command's got to be at least average before we're going to talk about converting them, I think.
Interesting. Is that you think that's like Crochet's thing too? It's like his command's average because he can just
throws a lot of strikes,
get away with hard fastballs.
He did in college too, I think.
Yeah,
I remember. Yeah, his stuff's overpowering, and he used to be a starter, so it's not like a true conversion. I think he was just a reliever because of the injury, right? Because of Tommy John and Lunesh's innings. I think. So it's good to see. It's easy. The Crochet being so good as a reliever right away is like, oh man, I was like kind of bummed because it's like no one's gonna convert him back, you know.
Yeah.
But it probably helps that the White Sox are not a competitive team right now. Not that they're a shade, but it's just like they could take chances on that. Whereas like Crochet was the closer of the Dodgers, a lot tougher to make.
Sure.
A lot tougher to be like, hey, let's try this thing.
Well, and you have more starting options to compete against too.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm happy to see. It's good. Yeah. Do we have any other? Let's see what other rapid fire things we got. Someone just asked about Justin Slayton, the Justin Slayton truther. To which I said, what more can I say? He's a good pitcher. Good Rule 5 pick. Actually, Kyle Bland had something I do want to talk about, and then we can get it after this. You have the pitcher list. He said, do you consider the shape/direction of misses and their potential impact on control and command? Will you develop pitch shapes and velocity? And if so, how do you quantify that? Comparable pitches and so forth. So my response on Twitter, and I'll go further here, said, yeah, it's definitely something to consider. Like enormous breaking ball shapes, like big breaking balls, have much lower propensity for strike percentage, just because the collision area at the strike zone is necessarily smaller given the big shape.
Yep.
and they incur a larger unfamiliarity penalty, which is just basically a fancy way of saying it's harder to learn how to throw a pitch with gross movement for strikes than something that's not, which is why the cutter is so popular. And I said also hitters just don't swing at outlier pitches, which is good and bad. Mostly bad in this case because, like, if we're judging it based on strikes and command, then that's not good. Hitters don't swing because you don't get free strikes.
Yeah, that funny enough, that the one of the very first guys that we ever did that kind of work with was Adam Ottavino in like 2017 or whatever. Because it's just like
3-point.
He basically throws a 12-6 curveball from sideways.
Yep.
And so his slider just breaks a ton. And then his fastball, has some arm side carry to it. But the reason that he came out was his fastball velocity was down. And so players had more time to react. And they would just spit on the slider, which they couldn't do when he was throwing 2 or 3 miles an hour harder. And that breaking ball is like nearly impossible to get in the zone for strikes. Yeah. So like the big change that he made was keeping the big slider, trying to layer in a little bit of velocity development, and then getting like a 0-0 gyro slider that was basically just a strike stealer. But it was like you couldn't just like eliminate one pitch and wait for like an 89 mile an hour heater.
Yeah, he did very effectively do that. Did a good job. Another good example of not necessarily converting into starter.
Which is funny. Not to beat it up or whatever, but like the other thing is like he didn't really change his command at all. No. But the strike percentage goes way up because the strategy is different. Like he wasn't throwing his slider for strikes any more often. He was just getting slightly more called strikes because he like changed his strategy a bit, and that just helps you navigate at bats with hitters.
Very studious person also.
Yeah, he's smart.
He works out at a shoe shop in Harlem, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if he still does that, but he did it. He did at the time. It was very.
We know some people that train there and keep it on the down low. But no, that's definitely something I think about. And then they also have, like, speaking of sideways breaking balls that are thrown, but called a curveball in this case, correctly in my opinion, is Nick Lodolo, who throws like a gigantic slider, which he calls a curveball. And it makes baseball savant other people mad because it's a slider. But I understand why he calls it a curveball. He's like, but it is. Just I have a lower arm slot. It's a curveball. And I agree. Also, just mentally, he wants to keep it a curveball. I would guess that it gets very poor swing rates against lefties because it's just a huge breaking ball. But it's on Pitching Ninja every week because he throws it to righties and then it ends up behind them and they swing anyway.
Yeah.
But Nick's command is like plus command, so he throws all of his other pitches for strikes wherever he wants. It's just that pitch is A, hard to throw where he wants it, and B, like doesn't lend itself to a lot of swinging strikes from same-handed hitters specifically. So that's another good example of that. So very good question, Kyle, on that. And it's definitely something you have to take into account. It's funny you mentioned Ottavino. First guy I think of is Nick Hagedorn.
Yeah.
Big breaking ball. Had to add a cutter.
Huge breaking ball.
Yeah.
Hit me in the shin with it.
Oh, he throws hard. Nice guy. Super. He must have felt pretty bad.
I was literally too embarrassed to. All right, he threw it to me and I whiffed it and it cracked me in the shin and I was like, God bless.
Any such cases, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think Lincecum talks about that too. Lincecum says he's awful to play catch with when they were played together at UW.
Yeah, I mean, it was also very obvious that he was like not trying to snap one off. He was just like, here you go. And it was just the best breaking ball I'd ever seen in my life.
Right, of course. Thrown from 7 feet, 8-inch release point or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It's not helping things. All right. Well, that thus concludes the rapid fire round. Thank you very much on Twitter. We have all those other ideas. If your choice wasn't picked, it's okay. We're going to archive them.
It's okay.
Well, we might do more.
It's not okay.
It's not, yeah.
It's not okay.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to the topics that we have scheduled, which Mike has on his phone, I believe. So what do we got?
Yeah. Boy, you're crushing the transitions today.
I'm trying to. Children are very bad at transitions from moving to one thing to another. Your kids, So now I've been mastering, like, we have 10 minutes before we got to go do this. We have 6 minutes. do this. You know, you got to layer it on, you know. So
Yeah, but that just layers in. Kids are also just as bad as they are at transitions. They're equally bad at time.
Yes. But as I've always said, if I give all those transition things, then I could be mad at my kid. Because otherwise, you know, I know the kids are bad at transitions, and if I didn't do anything to address it, then, well, whose fault is it really?
Probably still yours.
Well, yeah, but, you know, I justifiably, I at least did everything I could. I can't change time, you know. I've done a lot, you know, but that's not what I can do. So I control the controllables. That's an iPhone.
That's right.
And I feel justified in being angry at my children.
That's right. So this is like the time of year where there's a bunch of like mechanics breakdowns coming around. Like a lot of All-Star game selections.
This time of the year?
Well, I mean,
right now.
A lot of the there's a bunch coming out around the All-Star break.
That's true.
It's like, what did he change? Yeah. But like we've been running a biomechanics lab for a goodly amount of years now, and previously we also ran a service where you could get like a lot of video breakdowns of your own mechanics, and you know, like the question is, do you think that sort of like gross video analysis tool is viable? Because there are people that are like, hey, this is like just video is the only thing you need.
Knocking down strawman today. You know, it's something for sure. It plays well on Twitter. It plays well on social media. I won't deny, you know, like pitching.
What plays well?
Mechanics breakdowns and things like that. But I think, you know, what people, you know, it's hard to explain this to the American population or anyone, but like the theories that are like they call like just so things, you know, that fit, always seem better than the truth, of course. So it makes for great content and it, you know, makes sense.
Oh, you're saying like this guy throws this way. That's how he generates like his 100-mile-an-hour mechanics or whatever.
Yeah. And that's great content, of course. And largely it's probably accurate, to be honest. You know, it's not like it's fraudulent. Like it's probably true. But Driveline is, you know, in the business of getting players better, not necessarily in the analysis part of it and the content part of it in that regard, you know. And truth is that stuff has a pretty limited value when it comes to like actually getting better at your career. We have a pretty good understanding at Driveline of like what gets you better. I mean, we certainly spent a lot of money and time on our systems, and they're really, really accurate. And they continue to get better every year. But like through the force plates, it's those step function changes. Like when you add that technology, I think another good question on the other side of that, the gross video analysis, if I'm going to say that it has limited value, then like, are these advanced technologies valuable? Something that is also a tough question. And in the case of like force plates in the biomech lab, it's kind of inarguable how much additional precision it gives you and how useful that precision is. You know, over a decade ago, an assistant general manager once told me, you know, we want to send players to biomech labs, but then we get these reports back with kinematics and, you know, we asked like, what's the actionable feedback? And they're like, oh, it's for you to decide as coaches. And it's like, oh, that's not that valuable. It's hard for an assistant general manager to get the owner to spend money on these scientific reports that maybe have limited value or they don't know how to interpret. So that was always in the back of my mind when we built the lab, and people like Anthony Brady and Bill Hiesel and others really focused on drill scores and being able to make automated recommendations on these numbers, which lives today. And I work on, you know, personally. And it's just inarguable that these things are really, really valuable. Not only do they give you actionable feedback, but they also, that actionable feedback then if used does make a change, and that change does lead to positive improvements in efficiency and velocity. So that's the thing is like, does it actually work? And these gross video analyses, like a lot of them lack that test and retest framework. So that's, you know, they definitely have some value. Obviously it's great content and it's better than not having video, but you got to ask like, you know, is it really going to be that valuable if you're a really good high school player, a college player, a pro player? It's like, probably not. Like you need more precision.
Meaning like it's not valuable as a high school player to see Garrett Crochet's mechanics and then like try to apply them to yourself.
I think if you use them for examples, then it's good. You know, it's like
what is like stuff to try?
Yeah, or just like, someone's telling you like, oh, this person's hip shoulder separation is extremely good. Okay, well, what does that mean? What does very good look like? I only see myself or whatever. Well, then you might want to show them a video of Lincecum, right? Mm-hmm. Like you want, instead of a stick figure or some graphs, you might want to show them an example. But so then that's where I think comparisons are pretty valuable, is actually illustrating like the anatomical changes or things that like you're trying to get better, or your layback is poor, you need better maximum shoulder external rotation. Take a look at Billy Wagner throw a ball.
Sure.
Like those I think are really valuable when it comes to like this guy throws gas since the TikTokization of society.
The TikTokization of society.
I'm sure there's a better word for it, but that that's as an old person. It's not that it makes me angry. It's great content and it gets people interested in baseball, so those are good things. But as far as like limited, it has pretty limited analysis value in getting players. Like our job is to get players better at Driveline, and to get them better in the fastest amount of time with the least amount of wasted reps, as Casey Weathers likes to say.
What do you think about?
That's what I think about.
Yeah, what do you think about though? Like the idea that maybe that has limited value, but like once I have a coach who knows me, then I just then I'll just send video and like check mechanics, because like we do see that with like a subset of the athletes that we train, which is like they would love to send video every day, like how's it going, like let me check this out. So like there's got to be some balance there, right?
Yeah, it's good to have a coach that knows you and believes in you and understands you and understands what you're saying. There's no doubt about that. That's the part of coaching, but you're going to have 20 coaches at least in your lifetime, so you got to be able to get value out of them and not be codependent on any one particular person. Yeah, I think that's the value of Driveline's. So many of the insights of Driveline are driven from, systems that are automated and built by machine learning and then communicated by coaches. So it's consistent, and that's the value of a system, right? Is that it's consistent, it's accurate, and the coaches are relaying that information. Whereas compared to, any two humans may see whatever they see with their eyeballs is different, and that can be really frustrating for an athlete. Or some coach may become unavailable. Like if you play for a team and you really like this coach, but then you get traded. Well, that's the reality in professional baseball. And then in college, you may transfer, or that coach may leave or get fired. Like these things happen. So you can't really get overly dependent on a private instructor or college. I mean, it's just not good in general to do that. And additionally, it just doesn't scale. As you get better, that coach's insights may have limited value.
That's interesting. So you're saying like it's possible that, like, let's say the best coach at video analysis ever, hypothetically, that person exists. Who they are, we don't know. Is maybe not valuable to like an 8 or 9-year-old because their knowledge is so like honed in on the major league swing or the major league like pitch.
Yeah. And those guys are usually pretty good at like, the 10-year-olds to be like, have fun. They dumb it down and do these things and don't hit the ball on the ground. So they're good at dumbing it down. But yeah, their true skill is like lost on those levels, I think.
Yeah.
And vice versa. I mean, if your youth coach gives you great advice about, like, say you're a progressive youth coach, you can talk about like a positive attack angle, hitting the ball in the air and pulling the ball or whatever. Like, that's great. But if you gave that same advice to Travis Bazzana, it would have been bad this past year.
Sure.
Because Bazzana actually needed to decrease the attack angle, and yeah, he needed to focus on pulling the ball, but his weakness was against velocity. So if you don't understand how to interpret like sabermetrics specifically on how he was being attacked, and then a biomechanics report, and then how to make those changes, that can be really difficult. Fortunately, as speaking of the master of transitions, we sell courses and books that help you become good at that. So at Driveline, we make that knowledge available. A lot of it's free too on drivelinebaseball.com. So there you go.
That's true.
Like that. Yeah. That's good. But yeah, it's becoming more available. And in 10 years, these tools that we develop and others develop are going to become lower and lower cost. It's how it is. I mean, the Tesla Roadster cost an insane amount of money when it first came out, when it was made by Martin Eberhard. When Elon took over, it was still really expensive. And then, decades later, it's cheaper, and it's becoming cheaper every year. And it's just how it is, right? So that's the same with any technology. It's always just going to get cheaper. It's always going to get more scalable. High-speed cameras, the first ones I bought were, consumer ones were $1,000 and they were terrible, and now they're in your iPhone and you don't even think about it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that's what's going to happen here, as long as the demand is there for the product, and the demand for sports analysis and biomechanics and stuff it's there, and it's going to keep growing. So we're going to grow along with it. So if it's expensive or it's like hard to access today, just understand that won't be the case in 5 years. You can be frustrated today, no question, but in 5 years, it's gonna get driven down to become more accessible for everybody, which I think is exciting.
Yeah. We got a shout out or a call out or something from Joe Maddon. in an interview who said that Driveline specifically was ruining the game of baseball.
I don't think he said that. I didn't watch it. I'm not going to watch it, but is that what he said?
They asked him what's wrong with baseball.
Yeah.
And what he said specifically was that the old ways from players and coaches and guys that have been around the game for a long time are not being passed down to this new generation of players.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they're looking to Driveline, who he called the gurus now.
That's right.
To basically like improve their careers, and a lot of guys that have hard-won knowledge are being sort of sidelined. And then he additionally went in to talk about like front offices are not making like correct decisions, and like everything has become this like stat essentially, and we've sort of ripped the soul out of the game.
Got it. Enough said.
Enough said.
First, I think it might be, Joe, you see this, you might not. I agree with him. I agree largely with his point. The second point about the front office is, I'll save that for a little bit later. But as far as like the game of baseball, I do agree that I've actually publicly said this multiple times on Twitter. Doesn't seem to matter. Everyone still thinks I don't think it, but we are pushing out. It mostly happens, at least in my experience. I don't think Joe's wrong about this, but I see it primarily happening in the scouting departments. I'm biased because that's where I got my start on the scouting side, and I watched a lot of really good older people, and not necessarily just older, just experienced people. Because someone who's 18 that starts working in baseball then is 40 may not be old, but has got 22 years of experience, and those guys are getting pushed out. And I think that's very frustrating to see, because I don't agree with it, because what's in scouts or coaches' mind, as Joe's point is, probably more about coaches, since that's what he is. There's an imperfect like neural net in their brain, and so there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of data, whether it's accessible by a computer or not is not really relevant. And for a team that I worked with, we asked scouts, we graded them, could they determine bat speed? How good were they at determining the bat speed of an athlete, graded from the 20 to 80 scale? And so then using blast motion sensors on the players who actually knew their bat speed, and then we would align them to the results and then show them video of those players and then have them grade their bat speed. And it turns out that the most experienced scouts are as good as a blast sensor, so it's like, that's really valuable in Latin America. It's very valuable in high school, junior college, in low information areas. You need scouts like that. Not like them. You need them because you actually may not be able to get bat speed. They don't go to the Perfect Game All-American tournament. They don't go to these showcases. And even if they do, they might change over time. So having these scouts is extremely valuable. And that's one area where coaches are the same, right? If they can tell bat speed and things like that, coach can determine those things. So that's good. And so I do agree with Joe. But I don't think that was his point. I think his point was probably more on like the team aspect of it and the ways of the game, go away. And I think that's very frustrating. I understand his points. Driveline doesn't seek to replace that. I think that's a common sentiment. It certainly was when I was with the Reds. But then mentors like Buddy Bell and Cam Bonifay quickly understood that I actually really love the game of baseball and spent as much time around those guys as I could learning from them. I got in trouble multiple times having like 1.5 hour conversation with Buddy when I should have been doing something else. So, I understand why Joe feels that way. I don't particularly enjoy being the scapegoat of it as the figurehead of Driveline. But I also understand why I am one. I just would hope that Joe would give people like me a chance to explain that I don't feel that way. I know you feel the same too, so I'll let you kind of respond on your way.
Well, I think part of it is this, general conflation of like Driveline isn't the agent that's moving the game in this direction. Like Driveline, our organization and like the way that we train athletes and the way that we coach them is responding to the marketplace. Like if we don't, if we want to stop having guys like swing and miss a bunch and hit a bunch of home runs, then like those players need to stop getting rewarded with contracts. But like the challenge is that beginning with Bill James and, going brick by brick, the game has been modeled out to this like extensive degree to the point where like every player is no longer going into free agency with like a wide range of possible valuations. It's like a very tight band of like, we believe this player is this good, and that drives their career earnings. And so when they come to us and they're like, please help me with my career, that's indicative of two things. One, they might not be feeling like they're supported by the team, or they do feel like they're supported by the team, but they still just like want their own team around them because they're not sure how long they're going to be in that present situation. So there's a lot of reasons why a player would reach out to an independent organization that have nothing to do with the team being bad itself. But we have to go based off of like, well, these are the outcomes that either create runs or prevent runs. And this is how the marketplace is paying, players of your type. And this is how we think that you can be the best version of yourself and extend your career and like go, compete at the highest level. And part of the challenge with that is that, I think the other point that Joe is making is that it rips away some of the like team field dynamics of everything, because he was like criticizing the players for like only being out for themselves basically. And it's like, some of that I think is true, but also like the game has been modeled to such an extent that like people know exactly how to drive dollars. The teams are paying for like incredibly explicit skill sets, and that stinks. But it's not like we invented that and then made the Oakland A's start thinking that way.
We convince everyone of it.
A lot of that modeling was already built, and then the great sort of dual unlocks were understanding that you could train velocity, at the very earliest instances. And then second was understanding that training velocity had a discrete, correlation to a player getting paid more, having their career extended, et cetera. And once you can start tying those threads together, then, you do have players being interested in that information because that's what's in their best interests.
Yeah.
The challenge there is that it's being disseminated to players in a very slapdash and haphazard manner. And because the front offices are making decisions in this way, the coaches who do understand how to make a great baseball player, but aren't speaking the language that the front office is speaking, are de facto sidelined by that conversation happening, because it's not like tying into the way that the players know that they're going to get paid. Yeah. And I think that is, there's not really a solvable dynamic. It's just, it's like marketplace conditions.
Yeah. I mean, if you're labor and you love management, so you have a great relationship, there's still the adversarial nature of it, as you know very well in your previous jobs.
Sure.
But but the team aspect of it and the makeup side of it, which maybe is not exactly what Joe was saying, but the off the field intangibles and things like that, they're very much factored in by the smartest front offices. In some work that I'd done with a team recently, over the last 5 years, I won't say who, but there's a free agent, player who the front office was considering signing, and had found out in the off season that this player wasn't doing anything, like they weren't training or weren't staying on top of things. They were just taking time off, and then it was their decision. It's not they were being lazy. It's just like they made that this is what they felt, and the team disagrees. You're on the other side of 30 in your career, or however old the player was. I don't remember. And it's just, we think that rewarding this player with a contract is like, then they downgraded their models based on the offseason habits of this player.
Mm-hmm.
Their valuation went down. They offered him a contract. Person didn't like it, turned it down, signed elsewhere. They ended up being right. The player was, regressed pretty hard later. Not that that's important, but those things are factored in. The pitching coach at the time was just like, we don't want this around. And it was, yes, okay, a model specific and driven based on value, But that's not how the pitching coach saw it. The pitching coach was like, we don't need this type of attitude around the clubhouse. Like, what we need is being a good teammate, is someone that trains year round, is that tries very hard, is a good leader, is that our best players are also hardest workers. So that's very much factored in. And the most quantitative front offices, if you want to say like Baltimore is one of the most quantitative front offices, I know for a fact that Mike Elias and Sig feel that way. I know for a fact that they feel that way, that they care about the leadership of the team, and that they care that, yes, Rutschman was by far the best player of the draft, but they really did care about the leadership, and they really do nurture that and want Adley to be the captain of the team. They do care about that. They care about Gunnar Henderson. Of course, these players are great players, so it's easy to say. But they also felt that way about like Ryan O'Hearn, who's having a good year, but they knew all the makeup stuff and how Ryan is around the club and kind of leader he is. Like, it was valuable to have him with the team. So it's not like these things don't pay attention. But I understand why Joe feels that way, because possibly the last stop that he was at was not the most cohesive, and maybe didn't do the best job of layering in analytics and the offseason stuff. There was a lot of chaos where he was. So I understand.
Angels?
Yeah, you can put him on blast with you. Because it's not like Joe's like
I literally forgot where his last stop was.
Yeah, I mean, he came to Tampa and then, Chicago. So it's not like he was not exposed to it. So I understand exactly where he's coming from, and I understand how frustrated he can be. But in my time in baseball and continuing to be, these people really do care. It's not like, my boss, Craig Breslow, played baseball, played for Joe, I believe, and he very much cares about a lot of that stuff. Ex-players are becoming GMs these days. Yeah. Like, they're the ones, they still care a lot about it.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
I understand where Joe's coming from. I don't think he's wrong. When it comes to the front offices making bad decisions, I absolutely believe that he's right, that many do. No, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, no, they do.
They put together these dysfunctional teams. Specifically what he's talking about is like just like not caring about the team aspect and not having control.
Yeah, it's not a Transformers set. You can't just be like, oh, we're going to take this one and stick it over here, and now we're going to make like the super structure.
Probably one team that does a really good job of that. They make a lot of really good decisions too, quantitatively, or however you want to say it, but Atlanta does a really good job of that. Like, they really care about their team composition. And I think a lot of teams do. There's a lot of teams that just like value, like they model it based on a spreadsheet, and they're just like, oh, we plug in the teams based on wins above replacement. I think many teams have tried that.
We're going to replace Giambi in the aggregate.
I think people try that and then quickly realize how stupid that is. So it's like it's a mistake you only have to make one time. I mean, maybe some GMs make it over and over. I think it's going to change.
Yeah.
But in the places I've been in places that have made those decisions and it backfired, and they're like, okay, we actually got to really think about it. One place I was at, a player ripped them about not caring about that stuff. The GM was like, well, we don't see much value in it. The year later, clubhouse dumpster fire, a bunch of other issues. That GM like quickly reversed course and has become one of the best GMs in the game, and has like understood that very, very natively, because he didn't play baseball at a high level. So he maybe devalued it and then quickly understood, hey, we really should pay attention to it. Yeah. But to close on my side of it is like, be careful what you ask for, Joe, because they're going to start quantifying that too. And they already have, like the value of a good teammate.
Yeah.
And it is important. It really is important.
I think, if you think about the stereotypical like Joe Maddon team at its height, Joe's teams thrived on playing loose, being confident, like having a lot of self-belief. Like those teams were like that's him at his prime, was cultivating like these environments. And the thing that I'll say is like, I think that Driveline at its best also helps cultivate that in its players. Like, there's no denying that like you perform better athletically when you are loose, confident, like when you're in that sort of like, whether you want to call it flow or whatever, but you are just like, that breeds good performances, and it makes you a better teammate to be around. The path through here is like, when guys are getting all this information and then trying to keep it in their head and then go out and take that to the field, like they're already beaten. But like you can't perform that way. That's not a high performance mindset. But when you can take all this information, distill it down into some drill packages, some like very intense training, it's the training that drives the self-belief. Like once you can make a change, get beaten up for it, go start to see some success in a practice environment, take that to the game, get beaten up a little bit more about it, start to see some success based off of that, you're now in this place where it's like, okay, I know who I am as a baseball player. I know my strengths and weaknesses. I have a plan to like showcase my strengths and manage my weaknesses. And that puts me in like a really good place to go out and like perform really well. And, you know, that's no different than like we're all, I think, trying to cultivate this same thing, which is like players that are good enough to earn the spot on the field or the spot in the lineup, who have, you know, a sense of self-belief and who can go out and execute the jobs that they're paid to execute. And you know, like there's a lot of different ways to do it. The brand of baseball that is played now is reliant on a lot of these models because there's a bunch of money at stake. And overall, you know, I think the level of decision making inside of baseball front offices has elevated quite a bit. But there's still pockets where, you know, it's maybe not as sharp. But it does aim at this like one central truth, which is that if you want to be good, you've got to be playing confidently. And one way to get that level of confidence is to really understand yourself, have a plan for managing your career, your at-bat, your off-season, whatever, go execute it, see the success, and that really does like start to breed on itself.
Yeah, and players that do it to one another, like that's being a good teammate. You're getting it out. You know, Sonny Gray is one of the best at that.
Yeah,
I loved being around Sonny. You know, TJ Antone, Wade Miley. Yeah, they all do it in different ways. You know, Amir Garrett. Like, so these are some of the best teammates. And people will say it. You know, so that's being a good teammate, is bringing it out in each other and you know, being able to contribute what you can contribute, but then having a team identity. You know, Derek Johnson and David Bell of Cincinnati were so good at that. Just being like, this is how we pitch. You know, more DJ, I guess, in this regard, but this is how we do. This is our, you know, identity. It's Cincinnati. You know, this is how we attack players. This is how we do things. And it was a shared identity, and players shared what it meant to them and how they, you know, were to do it, because how Sonny does it is different than how Luis Castillo does it, and so forth. And
yeah.
How they go about it was a really cool way to have that team camaraderie for sure. So there can be a team. So, you know, Joe, I understand what you're saying. I understand the frustration. I totally get it.
Joe, come to the facility.
Come to the facility. It's not if he's still in LA, you know, it's not too far.
Yeah,
but
come.
Point is, like, I totally agree. I totally agree with the vast majority of your points. And the fact that you lash out at Driveline is not. I understand why, and I don't take offense to it. It's just hopefully you get to know us a little bit better. But yeah, it's just a different vibe here, I think.